In the quiet corners of history lie tales seldom told, forged by both the triumphs and failures of mankind. And this is one such story. The historical records we now share traverse the river of time, revealing those moments that changed the world. Let us embark on a journey to explore that ancient era, long forgotten yet still echoing in our present. Long before Arabs, Ottomans or French set foot in North Africa, one king unified these lands. His name was Massinissa, a visionary Berber leader. He stitched warring tribes into a unified whole, forging the kingdom of Numidia. Through shrewd alliances, skillful diplomacy and exceptional military prowess, his realm stretched from the Sahara Desert to the Mediterranean coast. Yet the bargains that secured victory sowed the seeds of future peril. In his quest for unity and power, Massinissa allowed Roman influence to penetrate deeply. He bound Numidia to an empire vastly greater and more enduring than his own. This marked Algeria's first epic of independence, yet also the beginning of a 2-millennium struggle against foreign domination. Algeria's story began when the Sahara had not yet dried and oceans of verdant grass surged across its plains. Ancient rivers meandered through valleys, shallow lakes drawing herds of antelope, giraffes and elephants. This land nurtured a web of life later buried and lost beneath shifting sands. In this verdant Sahara, early inhabitants found both refuge and hardship. Fossils and stone tools attest that Homo erectus walked here 1.5 million years ago. They used crude hand axes to cut meat and carve wooden implements. After the dawn of time, Homo sapiens settled upon this land. They scattered their camps, tools left behind, still marking their migratory paths. Their flint implements grew increasingly sophisticated and specialized, revealing greater craftsmanship and diverse food sources. By ancient lakes and streams, hearths and refuse heaps reveal the seasonal movements of their communities. They hunted gazelles, gathered fruits, and fished in shallow waters. This migratory rhythm shaped early existence, heralding the future emergence of oases. From preserved tools and skeletal remains, we glimpse the earliest contours of humanity's enduring presence in North Africa. As the Ice Age drew to a close, eastern Algeria gave birth to a unique civilization, the Lihya people. From around 10,000 BC, they thrived here for millennia. Thick layers of shell, middens, tools and ornaments remain. This people fashioned razor-thin blades from flint-adorned ostrich eggs and buried their dead with ochre beads. The sites of Capsa and Tabessa reveal these settled groups subsisted on hunting and gathering, having yet to develop agriculture. They adapted to increasingly arid lands, the verdant Sahara gradually transforming into grasslands, then desert. As the climate grew harsher, later communities responded with innovation rather than flight. They began domesticating animals, first cattle, then sheep and goats. They cultivated small plots beside natural wells. Early rock carvings in central Algeria depict scenes of humans and livestock coexisting, signalling the dawn of nomadic life. This shift gave rise to the concept of oases, hubs connecting people through society and trade. It also transformed social life. Large stone tombs called bazina emerged between the high plains and coastal hills. Constructed from massive stones, these circular tombs reflected growing social stratification and reverence for ancestors, signalling the emergence of ritualized society. Deep within the Tassili Niger mountains lie precious vestiges of this era. Thousands of rock art panels capture scenes of daily life. Hunters stride with bows slung, dancers form processions, cattle graze beneath patterned skies. Some figures appear grotesque, elongated torsos topped with mushroom-like heads, sometimes radiating luminous lines. Scholars debate their meaning, with most suggesting depictions of trance states or ritual use of hallucinogenic plants. If true, these images may represent the world's earliest recorded psychedelic ceremonies. These rock carvings offer a glimpse into a society that balanced practicality with spiritual pursuits deeply attuned to the shifting earth beneath their feet. As the prehistoric era receded, North Africa's inhabitants began forging a linguistic and cultural identity that would become known as the Berbers. By the first millennium BC, their communities had evolved beyond primitive gathering and small-scale pastoralism. Local chieftains emerged across the region. Each controlled trade routes linking the inland mountains, fertile coastline, and the heart of the Sahara. These caravan paths carried salt from desert oases northwards, transported metal ores and ivory towards the coast, while supplying Berber chieftains with Mediterranean wine and tools. Control of trade routes equated to control of power. Chieftains who ensured road safety, mediated merchant disputes, and collected tribute gradually transcended their roles as clan elders to become true rulers. During the 9th to 8th centuries BC, Phoenician merchants from the Levant landed along North Africa's coast. Initially arriving as seafarers, they sought metal ores and secure harbours. They constructed small ports at sites like Hippo Regius and Tipasa along Algeria's coast. These outposts became staging points for vessels between Carthage and Gadir, serving as meeting points between Berber merchants and the wider Mediterranean world. Exchanges extended beyond mere commodities. New technologies, artistic styles, and religious ideas permeated inland. Carthaginian merchants traded with local Berber chieftains, exchanging coins, tools, and luxury goods for access to inland markets. Over time, some tribal confederations evolved into true kingdoms, their territories stretching from the coast to the desert fringes. One transformative shift that reshaped the era was the mastery of ironworking. Around the first millennium, BC iron smelting techniques spread across the Maghreb, supplanting softer bronze and fundamentally altering warfare. Sharper iron spearheads, more durable blades, and superior agricultural implements granted users advantages both on the battlefield and in economic spheres. Breakthroughs in horse training similarly revolutionized mobility. Cavalry could now traverse vast expanses that had once isolated valleys and tribes. This mobility fostered new political unifications. Chieftains with mounted forces wielded influence far beyond their immediate domains. Raiding, tribute collection, and tribal diplomacy became components of larger political systems sustained through negotiation and personal prestige. Leadership in early Berber regimes seldom passed from father to son. Power rested instead upon personal charisma, military prowess, and alliances forged through gifts or persuasion. Oral traditions rather than written laws underpinned rulers' legitimacy. Numerous small tribes maintained loose allegiance to larger confederations, constructing a fluid yet resilient political world. This adaptability became an advantage for Berber societies in confronting future empires. Concurrently, their spiritual realm blended ancient and new influences, indigenous worship of the earth water sources, or the heavens blended with imported faiths like the Phoenician deities Baal, Hammon, and Tanit, revealing a religious form shaped by cultural exchange rather than conquest. The earliest urban centres began to take shape during this period. Small fortified towns emerged in the highlands, sometimes enclosed by rudimentary stone walls, guarding storage pits and workshops. Archaeologists regard these as Algeria's earliest attempts at urban life, precursors to later cities like Sirte and Timgad. Within the walls, artisans crafted pottery, metal ornaments, and ironware products circulating along trade routes, linking inland regions to the coast. This economic specialisation spurred the formation of further settlements and fostered more stable political institutions. Concurrently, Berber cavalry gained renown for their exceptional skill and endurance, serving as mercenaries for foreign powers long before Rome's imperial rise. North African legions fought across Sicily, Spain, and southern Italy, carrying their homeland's tactics and spirit far afield. the Berber kingdoms had long been deeply integrated into the wider world. They maintained both independence and interconnectedness, possessing distinct local characteristics while being deeply rooted in Mediterranean culture. By the 4th century BC, the network of North African Berber kingdoms gradually disintegrated under the rule of a powerful state commanding both land and sea supremacy. This gave rise to Numidia, a loose confederation spanning present-day northern Algeria and parts of Tunisia. Its inhabitants shared language and culture, yet political unification required generations of tribal chieftain warfare. Initially, the territory divided into two major regions, the eastern Massilia and the western Massilia. Both regions allied with external powers, most notably Carthage, which deployed North African cavalry in Mediterranean wars. Yet the balance of power among Numidia's states remained perpetually precarious. Its rulers recognised early that diplomatic manoeuvring with distant empires held equal importance to domestic warfare. This insight proved critical when Carthage and Rome erupted into the Punic Wars in the 3rd century BC. King Gaia of Massilia chose Carthaginian allegiance, while his arch-rival Syphax of Massilia initially maintained neutrality before seeking Roman aid. This volatile alliance triangle harboured both opportunity and peril. Gaia's young heir, Massinissa, demonstrated extraordinary military prowess. As a prince loyal to Carthage, he led Numidian cavalry campaigns across the Iberian Peninsula, swiftly mastering logistics, rapid manoeuvres and battlefield command, yet, as Carthage waned under Roman pressure, he decisively shifted allegiance. Recognising Numidia's future lay with the victors, he turned his allegiance towards Rome. On the eve of Rome's final offensive, Massinissa utilised Roman forces to reclaim his family's lands, defeating Syphax in 203 BC. Over the subsequent years, he consolidated tribal confederations into a unified kingdom, his renown striking fear into both allies and foes. Rome regarded Numidia as a strategic ally against Carthage, granting nominal autonomy in exchange for loyalty and grain supplies. Upon assuming power, Massinissa implemented settlement policies to consolidate stability. Following Roman counsel, he promoted extensive agriculture, establishing olive groves and grain fields that transformed parts of Algeria into highly productive food-producing regions, becoming the granary of the Mediterranean world. Archaeological discoveries of terraced fields, irrigation systems and granaries bear witness to these early agricultural policies. Massinissa's court reflected a fusion of diverse cultures. Berber nobles preserved traditional customs and oral codes, while Carthaginian officials introduced record-keeping systems and trade regulations. Greek culture permeated through art architecture and coin design, integrating Numidia into the broader network of Mediterranean monarchies. The capital Sirte became the hub of administrative and military organisation. Workshops produced weapons, pottery and coins engraved with Numidian symbols. This kingdom became one of the few African entities regarded by Rome as an ally rather than a client state. This recognition reflected both diplomatic acumen and pragmatic value. Yet the peace forged by Massinissa rested upon his personal authority. Following his death in 148 BC, internal strife among his sons dismantled the unity he had established. Rome seized the opportunity to intervene first as arbitrator, then assuming the role of ruler. Centuries later, under the ambitious prince Jugurtha, Numidia mounted its final struggle for independence. In the late 2nd century BC, he employed ambushes and a war of attrition against Rome, demonstrating both Numidia's tenacious resistance and the profound influence of Roman manipulation. Defeat led to the annexation of its territories, and by 46 BC, Numidia became part of Rome's North African frontier. Yet the military legacy of Massinissa endured. His light cavalry, swift, disciplined, and elusive, astonished Roman commanders who widely adopted their tactics. Julius Caesar himself later extolled their ghostly speed across the desert plains, a testament to a warrior tradition enduring beyond the kingdom's demise. When Numidia finally became a Roman province in the 1st century BC, North Africa entered 4 centuries of imperial rule, becoming intimately linked to the Mediterranean world's economic heartland. The fertile plains between the Atlas Mountains and the coast became the most productive farmlands of the Western Roman Empire. Roman rulers divided the land into provinces and established a tax network, transforming Algeria into a major producer of grain, olive oil, and wine. The countryside was dotted with large estates known as villas, where slave labourers and local tenant farmers toiled to fill ships bound for Roman ports. The title granary of the West was both a compliment and a fact. These bountiful harvests sustained legions and cities across the empire. New towns sprang up beside ancient Berber and Carthaginian settlements. Landed veterans founded colonies modelled on Italian towns. Timgadquicul, modern Jamila, and Tapasa exemplify this wave of urban planning. Straight streets intersected at right angles, flanked by colonnades, markets, and baths. Remnants of squares, triumphal arches, and theatre ruins testify to how Roman urban life took root deep within the African interior. Unlike many frontier outposts, Algeria's settlements evolved into self-sustaining urban centres. Rather than mere military garrisons, Latin inscriptions reveal local elites adopting Roman names and official titles. Yet linguistic traces in rural areas confirm Berber remained dominant beyond the city walls. A dense network of infrastructure bound these cities together. Roman engineers carved mountain passes through plateaus linking coastlines to inland strongholds, such as Lambesis, garrisoned by the 3rd Augustan Legion aqueducts, spanned arid expanses delivering water to nourish fields and irrigate public baths. The Limes fortifications demarcated the empire's southern frontier. Fortresses and watchtowers lined the desert edge, guarding caravan routes and warding off raids. These structures not only symbolised authority, but linked distant communities to markets and rulers hundreds of miles away. Over time, North Africa's indigenous peoples became pivotal to the empire's functioning. Berber cavalry joined the legions, bringing generations of desert warfare expertise. Military service offered salaries, Roman citizenship, and pathways to advancement even to the imperial court. By the 2nd century AD, Romans born in North Africa held prominent positions throughout the empire. Most famously, Septimius Severus, born in neighbouring Leptis Magna, rose through military ranks to become emperor. His career trajectory underscored the growing significance of the African provinces, supplying Rome with both wealth and leadership. Roman Algeria also emerged as a pivotal centre for religious transformation. By the 3rd century AD, Christianity had spread throughout cities like Hippo, Cythera, and Caesarea. Doctrinal disputes fractured Christian communities, giving rise to potent movements like Donatism, whose roots traced back to persecutions-era debates over doctrinal purity. These conflicts revealed Christianity's deep embedding in daily life long before it became the empire's state religion. Meanwhile, rural areas preserved ancient pagan customs where locals quietly venerated ancient Berber deities alongside classical gods. Even as imperial authority began to crumble in the 4th and 5th centuries, local populations preserved their language and customs. Beyond the reach of governors and legions, small farming villages sustained ways of life dating back to pre-Roman times. Archaeological evidence indicates that after Roman rule waned, fields were still cultivated, pottery styles persisted, and oral traditions remained intact. At the Timgad ruins, one structure bears an enduring imprint of this era: the public library, one of the few surviving examples of its kind in the ancient Roman world. Its walls once held scrolls read by citizens nearly 2 millennia ago, demonstrating that even on the empire's periphery, knowledge and urban life flourished side by side. By the early 5th century, Rome's influence in North Africa waned under internal strife and economic pressures. In 429 AD, the Germanic tribe known as the Vandals crossed the sea from southern Spain into North Africa, accompanied by tens of thousands of people, including families and retinues. King Gaiseric, their leader, sensed opportunity amid Rome's chaos. His forces advanced along the coast, encountering little organised resistance, seizing control of most provinces spanning present-day Algeria and Tunisia within a decade. The wealth and infrastructure left behind by centuries of Roman rule became the foundation of a new kingdom centred on Carthage. Gaiseric thus established an empire based in Africa, controlling the western Mediterranean sea lanes and challenging the maritime powers of the time. The Vandals introduced a branch of Christianity known as Arianism. This doctrine rejected certain core tenets of Catholicism, creating a rift between the new rulers and the Romanised urban populations. Society thus became profoundly divided. Arian bishops replaced or expelled Catholic clergy. Church property changed hands and legal privileges shifted to the new rulers. Despite ongoing turmoil, the Vandals largely preserved the Roman tax and urban systems. Latin remained, the administrative language, and Roman law persisted in modified forms. Trade networks adapted to the new order, rather than collapsing, with grain, olive oil, and pottery continuing to circulate between African ports and southern Europe. Yet the Vandals' control had its limits. Beyond the fertile coastal zones, the densely forested interior and highland plains largely remained free. Local Berber tribes reclaimed control of former strongholds, forming small alliances that placed pastures and trade routes beyond royal reach. Some tribes paid tribute or traded with coastal rulers, while others raided their settlements. This coastal inland equilibrium reflected a political landscape that endured for centuries. Seaports linked the vast Mediterranean, while inland populations maintained their freedom through migration and terrain. Under Gaiseric and his successors, the Vandals forged a formidable navy dominating western Mediterranean shipping lanes. Their fleet plundered islands, intercepted merchant vessels, and even captured Rome in 455 AD. This event astonished the world not because of a barbarian victory in Europe, but because an African kingdom had demonstrated such formidable power across the seas. For decades, North Africa remained the strategic heartland of the Vandal kingdom. Yet the state's survival depended on two pillars: naval strength and the stable succession of dynastic rule. Both gradually crumbled in the 6th century, amid intensifying internal strife and external pressures. In 533 AD, the Byzantine Empire under Emperor Justinian launched a military campaign to reclaim the West. General Belisarius led a well-organised army ashore in North Africa, swiftly defeating the Vandal kingdom. Through a series of decisive victories, North Africa returned to imperial rule, with the seat of governance shifting from Rome to Constantinople. Yet the restored authority rested on fragile foundations. While the Byzantines rebuilt coastal city walls and repaired sections of frontier defences, they struggled to extend their influence into Algeria's interior, where local Berber chieftains maintained de facto independence. Mediterranean port trade continued unabated, yet the empire faced persistent rebellions, heavy taxation, and a dwindling military presence. As the 7th century progressed, this fragile frontier would encounter the emerging Arab religious political power. This force would once again rewrite the region's history. By the mid-7th century, North Africa stood on the brink of new transformation. Though the Byzantine Empire still controlled coastal cities, decades of turmoil had weakened its rule over Algeria's mountains and deserts. It was upon this fragile terrain that the first Arab armies of the Rashidun Caliphate advanced westward from Egypt, led by commanders of the nascent Islamic State seeking expansion and unification. Their primary objectives were pragmatic and clear: securing vital trade routes, collecting tribute, and propagating the new faith that had unified the vast expanse from Arabia to the Nile. The earliest campaigns reached the regions of Tripolitania and Byzacena, around 647 AD, encountering Byzantine forces defending strategic passes and fortified towns alongside local Berber militias. These initial operations were limited in scale, characterized by raids and truces rather than swift victories. Resistance proved formidable. The dense forests of the Ouls Mountains and the vast Sahara Desert made large-scale occupation exceedingly difficult. Berber tribes fought with swift maneuverability and astonishing endurance tactics that had previously brought down countless empires. Victory gradually emerged over decades as the Umayyad dynasty continuously dispatched fresh troops and settlers, establishing fortified strongholds. The turning point came with the outpost of Kairouan, present-day Tunisia, founded around 670 AD. From this city, the Islamic regime expanded westward, serving both as an administrative centre and a spiritual sanctuary. Its mosque, schools and marketplaces established a new paradigm for settlement, allowing Islamic civilization to take root in the Maghreb. The conversion of local populations was not instantaneous. Islam's spread followed regional rhythms shaped by politics, trade and familial ties. Coastal towns long engaged in Mediterranean commerce embraced the new religion earlier, owing to close contact with Arab immigrants. And officials' inland tribes adopted it more gradually, often blending Islamic customs with indigenous traditions. Scholars later termed this Islamization without Arabization, where conversion to faith outpaced linguistic or identity transformation. To manage this transition, governors granted local chieftains partial autonomy contingent upon tax compliance and maintaining order. This pragmatic arrangement transformed many Berber leaders into collaborators rather than subjects. The faith's emphasis on equality before God attracted groups long excluded by imperial systems. Yet cognitive divergences soon emerged. Certain Berber factions embraced Kharijite doctrine, a sect originating from early Islamic disputes over leadership and justice. Kharijites rejected dynastic rule, asserting any devout believer could lead the community regardless of lineage. For tribes accustomed to collective governance and opposed to centralized authority, these principles held tangible significance. In Algeria, Khawarij communities took root in mountain valleys and desert oases, shaping local resistance movements for centuries. Thus emerged North Africa's religious landscape, an interweaving of orthodox and reformist beliefs, both rooted in shared faith yet taking distinct forms due to regional autonomy. By the 8th century, Islamic rule had firmly established itself along Algeria's coastline, and Highlands Arab administrative and monetary systems introduced new regulations for trade and taxation. Caravans traversed desert routes, transporting gold, salt and slaves, linking cities like Tireh and Tahat to markets in the southern Sahel region. Mosques sprang up like mushrooms after rain. Many converted from Roman and Byzantine ruins. Builders reused carved stones and column bases. In certain sites, Latin inscriptions remain visible beneath early Islamic arches. These material layers etch Algeria's historical trajectory, civilization continually reshaping itself upon the stones of the past. Islam brought a shared faith and literate culture to the region. Yet, its expression remained rooted in North African distinctiveness, an independence that had withstood all former empires. By the late 8th century, a quiet yet enduring transformation unfolded in Algeria's central highlands. While most of North Africa submitted to Abbasid rule, the distinct Islamic vision quietly took root among communities yearning for freedom and religious tolerance. Ibadati Muslims adhered to an early form of Islam, tracing its roots to the Kha or IJ movement, while rejecting its radical elements. Seeking peace beyond imperial strife, they established a new political and spiritual centre in the city of Tihat modern -80, or AT in the Tihat Highland. From these foundations, the Rustum Imamate gradually evolved into a significant polity, at the crossroads of the Mediterranean and the Sahara, achieving a balance between faith, scholarship, and commerce. Th occupied a pivotal position in inland trade, linking northern North African ports with caravan routes traversing Sahara towards West Africa. Caravans heading north transported salt, gold, and ivory, while southbound caravans returned laden with cloth, pottery, and manuscripts. This commercial prosperity made the Rustamid realm the wealthiest region in the Maghreb. Unlike the imperial courts of Damascus or Baghdad, the Rustamid regime functioned as a theocratic republic. Its leader, the imam, was not inherited by bloodline, but elected through consultation among scholars and elders based on personal virtue, learning, and integrity. This system embodied the ibad, ideal of pious equality, starkly contrasting with neighboring dynasties reliant on hereditary rule. The Rustamid dynasty integrated religious devotion with pragmatic governance. Their state formed a federation of urban centers and rural tribes, drawing its cohesion more from shared faith than military might. Taxes funded public works, scholars received stipends, and trade routes were secured through both military force and diplomacy. Arabic became the administrative language, yet the populace retained its multi-ethnic composition. Berbers, Arabs, Jews, and freed African slaves carried in a relatively tolerant framework. Amazigh court extravagance. Historical records indicate they managed vast wealth while living with extreme frugality. Tirha itself became a magnet for knowledge. The city's mosques doubled as institutions of learning. Scribe transcribed religious texts, while libraries expanded through donations and trade. Travelers recorded local scholars treasuring books, occasionally exchanging rare manuscripts for gold or fine steeds. The circulation of texts linked Egypt with Baghdad, Qaluwan, and Cordoba, forging a knowledge network spanning the Maghreb, Middle East, and Andalus. This land nurtured not only theology, but also flourishing philosophy, mathematics, and jurisprudence. Under the imam's rule, these disciplines found fertile ground. Merchant patrons amassed wealth precisely because of the stability maintained by the Rustamid dynasty. The imam's tolerant policies cemented this advantage. Christians retained their churches, while Jewish merchants traded openly under state protection. Their role in finance and trans-Saharan trade further enhanced the international character of Totte's markets. This symbiotic atmosphere afforded the region a rare security, while many parts of the Islamic world suffered from political violence. Yet beneath this stability lay pressures the Rustamid rulers could not ignore. Tensions arose between settled communities and nomadic tribes, while rival Islamic movements, particularly those aligned with the rising Fatimid dynasty, challenged Ibadi influence. By the early 10th century, Fatimid armies advanced westward, reaching central Algeria. In 909 CE, Totte was captured and burned. Its library collections were scattered, and scholars were forced into exile. The collapse of the Rustamid imamate ended to centuries of Ibadi autonomy, yet its spiritual legacy endured in the desert oases of the Engi and across the seas in Oman. These traditions, originating in Totte, persisted, demonstrating how ideas born in a remote highland city could shape the fringes of the Islamic world. The Berber empires emerged from the Maghreb's deserts and plateaus, reshaping North Africa's political landscape, with influence stretching from the Atlantic to the western Mediterranean. Foremost among these was the Almoravid dynasty, whose origins trace back to the mid-11th century religious reform movement among the San-Hajj tribes of Western Sahara. Its founders initially traveled the trade routes between Senegal and Morocco as teachers and merchants, dedicated to purifying local religious practices and uniting scattered nomadic tribes. Adhering to strict Islamic jurisprudence, they constructed defensive aribats, strongholds combining schools and fortresses along caravan routes. This religious reform movement swiftly evolved into nation-building. By integrating trade networks with religious systems, they established a robust foundation for territorial expansion. The Almoravid dynasty grew in power, through its control of trans-Saharan trade routes, which carried gold, salt, and slave trade. Its capital, Murcia, linked the inland desert with Atlantic ports and markets across North Africa. In Algeria, they consolidated drew over strategic cities like Tlemcen, while controlling mountain passes and coastal plain. Trade wealth sustained legions of camel cavalry, renowned for their discipline and endurance in desert marches. This fusion of commercial and military order extended the Almoravid empire northwards into Al-Andalus, repelling Christian kingdoms. Expansion into Muslim-ruled Spain. Imperial unity rested on faith and pragmatism rather than ethnic bonds, uniting Arab scholars, Berber warriors, and Andalusian artisans within a single political framework. Yet over time, the centralized authority that had ensured stability became a source of conflict. Local leaders yearned for autonomy, while reformists denounced the erosion of moral standards. This gave rise to a second Berber movement, the Almohad dynasty. Its founder, Ibn Taymiyyah, a religious scholar from the Atlas Mountains, advocated a return to strict monotheism and social justice. Upon his death, leadership passed to his follower Abd-al-Mumin, hailing from what is now Algeria, Abd-al-Mumin, and transformed the movement from a spiritual call to arms into a professional, his state apparatus. Under his command, the Almohad dynasty defeated the Almoravid dynasty in the mid-12th century, seizing their territories across North Africa and southern Spain. The new empire established its capital at Murcia, though its logistical and military strength primarily originated from Algeria and Algiers, serving as pinnacle governmental centers and military stronghold. The Almohad dynasty exhibited a dual character of continuity and innovation. It inherited the trade, networks and agricultural wealth of its predecessors while pursuing more ambitious cultural objectives. Under imperial patronage, scholars, architects, and artisans flourished. The empire erected magnificent mosques in Tlemcen and Seville, emphasizing geometric precision and light-filled architectural design, establishing the foundational style for later Maghreb architecture. Within Algeria, fortified walls and urban planning became increasingly sophisticated, tightly linking inland towns with coastal markets. The administrative system unified currency and law, strengthening long-distance trade links between the region, the Mediterranean, and the Saharan desert. Intellectual pursuits also deepened. Philosophers and medical scholars, supported by the Almohad dynasty, authored works and participated in academic debate extending from Maghreb to Andalusian University, despite its strict governance. The Almohad dynasty pursued a relatively open and inclusive policy, accepting scholars of any origin provided they embraced the empire's unified faith. These centuries marked a turning point in trans-continental political and cultural exchange under Berber-dominated governance. Their practical innovations included a network of coastal towers and lighthouses along the Maghreb shoreline, utilizing flames or polished metal to reflect light. These towers enabled long-distance signaling, constituting one of the earliest known coastal long-range communication systems. Such engineering achievements complemented their governance and scholarly accomplishments, demonstrating the fusion of local craftsmanship with a global outlook, a defining characteristic of Berber civilization at its zenith. In the early 13th century, as the great Almohad Empire began to disintegrate, a new Berber dynasty emerged in Tlemcen. This dynasty, the Zyanids or Abd al-Wadids, originated from the Zen tribe, long settled in the highlands of present-day western Algeria. Their rise filled the political vacuum left by the retreating imperial forces. In 1235, the dynasty's founder, Yaqut al-Mora and Ibn Zayd declared independence from the Almohad Empire and established Tlemcen as his capital. This act gave birth to a kingdom enduring over 3 centuries, its territories linking trade routes between the Mediterranean coast and the Saharan hinterland. Tlemcen's geographical position conferred unique advantages. Situated at the crossroads of Morocco and Tunisia, this city commanded both maritime access and desert thoroughfares, becoming a vital hub between the Maghreb and Al-Andalus. Saharan caravans arrived laden with salt and gold dust, while merchant ships from the north brought brocades, glassware, and European metalwork. This flow of goods established the city as the economic heart of the western Maghreb. Urban districts gradually formed around mosques, gardens, and vaulted souks, where guilds produced leather goods, textiles, and exquisite pottery exported as far as Granada and Cairo. Such prosperity earned the city the posthumous Daikal Pearl of the Maghreb, a designation reflecting its craftsmanship and scholarship rather than imperial might. The Zayawid rulers understood their survival depended not only on military strength but crucially on diplomacy. To the west lay the Umayyad dynasty of Morocco, aspiring to rule the entire Maghreb. To the east, the Hafsid dynasty governed Tunisia. Both possessed vast territories and populous realms, yet each depended upon the trade routes of Townsend. The Zayawid chieftains mastered the delicate balance of tribute and alliances, shifting allegiances when necessary to preserve their freedom. Messengers traversed ceaselessly between Townsend, Fez and Tunis, conveying not merely documents on tributes, but the tacit understanding that commerce thrived only under the iron rule of peace. Even when besieged repeatedly by the Umayyad dynasty, most famously during the prolonged siege of the late 13th century, the city held fast through resilience and negotiation. Townsend's political flexibility fostered a rich cultural vitality. Scholarly institutions imparted jurisprudence, languages, and philosophy, while artisans organized themselves into rigorous guilds, preserving the crafts of metalwork, weaving, and marquetry. Within mosques, exquisite Kufi calligraphy and carved stucco decorations reflected the Andalusian artistic heritage arts brought south by refugees fleeing the Christian reconquista. Music held a special status. Andalusian families and court musicians settled in Cordoba, bringing intricate melodic systems blending Arab and Iberian influences. These traditions gave rise to a compositional and performance school renowned throughout the western Mediterranean. Judges, poets, and mystics flourished under state patronage, while Sufi orders found fertile ground in Cordoba for imparting spiritual teachings. Over the following centuries, internal strife among noble families gradually eroded the resilience sustaining dynastic unity. Successive regime changes were accompanied by intrigue and external intervention. The expansion of maritime trade, dominated by European merchants, drained wealth from inland caravan cities, undermining their economic foundations. Concurrently, Ottoman forces expanded westward from their coastal strongholds in Algeria. By the mid-16th century, the Zayawid dynasty could no longer withstand external pressures. In 1557, Ottoman commanders incorporated Townsend into their domain, ending its independent kingdom, yet failing to eradicate its cultural influence. The legacy of the Zayawid era endures through urban architecture, scholarly traditions, and an unbroken musical heritage. Townsend's instruments and melodies spread across the Mediterranean via migrants and envoys. Courts from Tunis are divided to engage local musicians, establishing Western Algerian music as a shared artistic language bridging Africa and Europe. By the early 16th century, after centuries of conquest, the Christian kingdoms of Spain had reclaimed the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. With the fall of Granada in 1490 to end the rise of a unified Spanish monarchy, attention swiftly turned towards the shores across the Mediterranean. North Africa lay fragmented by internal divisions, its weakened defences further exposed by economic decline. The Maghreb region, divided among Berber and Arab states, lacked the unified leadership once embodied by the Almohad dynasty. For Spain, conquering North Africa's coastal regions meant controlling vital trade routes, securing new harbours for its fleet, and establishing a strategic bulwark against Ottoman expansion. Religious motivations were equally significant. The crusading spirit that drove the Reconquista also provided a moral justification for expansion beyond Europe's southern borders into Muslim territories. In 1505, the Spanish fleet launched a series of raids on the Algerian coast, marking the commencement of the first phase of the campaign. Cargo galleons armed with cannons landed at the port of Mers-Kiber, west of Oran. Within months, the city fell, granting Spain its first foothold on the African continent. Just 2 years later, Spanish forces captured Oran, transforming it into a fortified stronghold defended by heavy artillery and stone bastions. Their tactics combined naval bombardment with the latest siege technology, overwhelming local defences unaccustomed to weapons of such range and destructive power. Algiers was subsequently captured, though local resistance forces occasionally mounted counterattacks, causing the whole to waver. These early coastal strongholds formed a strategic network through which Spain sought to control trade and shipping in the western Mediterranean. The sudden appearance of foreign garrisons shattered the delicate balance of power maintained after the Almohad Caliphate's collapse. Remnant Berber kingdoms and Arab chieftains further fragmented. Rulers attempted to unite opposing factions, yet divided loyalties and limited technology left them at a disadvantage against Spanish artillery and stone fortifications. Townsend, once a thriving centre of trade and learning, suffered particularly. Cut off from the coastline, its economy stagnated. Desert caravans arriving found dwindling buyers. Wealth once circulating through inland markets now flowed to Spanish miners-controlled ports. Some rulers were forced to pay tribute, while others allied with pirates whose ships increasingly plied the Algerian coast. Concurrently, waves of Muslim refugees poured into Algeria from overseas. These Andalusian exiles were families expelled after the Reconquista, later displaced by religious persecution. They brought highly developed craft, architectural skills, and seafaring knowledge, transforming the societies that received them. Coastal towns flourished, their whitewashed houses and new mosques bearing Iberian influence, while artisans introduced refined metalwork and textile techniques to local guilds. Their arrival infused North African urban life with skills that would later prove pivotal in resisting European domination. Yet Spanish occupation drained resources, sparking near-constant warfare. Fortresses required stable supply lines across perilous seas, while each outpost within communities hostile to foreign rule. As inland leaders joined coastal communities encountering the presence, raids upon Spanish strongholds became routine. This burgeoning resistance soon drew the attention of the eastern Mediterranean, where Ottoman fleets were expanding westward. By 1518, Ottoman privateers flying the imperial banner intervened in North African politics, allying with local forces to directly challenge Spanish authority. The collapse of the independent Maghreb kingdoms was swift. Their demise marked the end of centuries of Berber freedom and ushered in a new imperial contest between Europe and the Ottoman world. Even the architecture of the time bears the imprint of conflict. In several captured coastal fortress cities, Spanish miners seized cannons were melted down and cast into the walls. The very weapons that once threatened the cities now became witnesses to Algeria's urban transformation. Amidst the chaos unleashed by Spanish expansion along North Africa's shores, two brothers from the Aegean unexpectedly emerged as saviors. Alminus and Hayred and Barbarossa, two seasoned pirate captains from Mediterranean campaigns, arrived in Algiers around 1516. Their fleet, laden with artillery and seasoned warriors, offered refuge to cities oppressed by Spanish stronghold. In exchange, they demanded allegiance to the Ottoman Sultan. After Arzu's death in battle, his brother continued the campaign, formally placing Algiers under Istanbul's protection with 1518. Thus began the Ottoman Regency of Algiers, an alliance blending imperial authority with local autonomy, naval might with tribal resilience. Though nominally ruled in the Sultan's name, real power swiftly fell into the hands of local chieftains known as DYS, elected by the Janissary garrison in Algiers. The Dey operated almost entirely independently of Constantinople. This system fostered a unique political form. Ottoman idols, institutions, and legal terminology intertwined with Berber customs and local confederations. The centre of governance focused on cities and coastal areas, while mountainous and inland regions were indirectly administered through tribal chieftains. Taxation and tribute maintained the balance of power. This was a centralized yet fragile polity, relying equally on rhetoric and force. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Algiers developed into a powerful maritime republic under pirate rule. Its harbour teemed with swift warships, many constructed or refitted by Andalusian craftsmen who had fled Spain after the fall of Granada. The fleet was manned by a diverse crew: Turks, Arabs, Berbers, converted Europeans, and even renegades who rose from captivity to become captains. They targeted merchant fleets from France, Spain and Italy, plundering vessels for ransom and transforming piracy into a regulated enterprise. The riches from these voyages built palaces, mosques, bathhouses and public fountains, reshaping the city's skyline. Algiers became one of the Mediterranean's most prosperous ports, renowned for trade and captivity. The Janissaries became the backbone of political life. This elite infantry, originally introduced from Ottoman territories, gradually evolved into an independent military aristocracy, wielding life minus death authority over the Dey. If unpopular, the Dey might be deposed or assassinated within the barracks of the castle walls. This volatile succession of power endowed the regency system with both flexibility and unpredictability. Despite constant coups and factional strife, the system endured for over 3 centuries, enabling Algiers to maintain independence while other North African states fell under European control. Beyond the capital, rural areas operated to a different rhythm. Tribal confederations governed pastoral lands, maintained local militias, and negotiated taxation with Ottoman officials. Some tribes acknowledged the governor's authority only nominally, while others preserved autonomy through tribute or alliances. This fostered the pluralistic governance structure, imperial administration in cities, customary law in the countryside, and sustained Sahara and long-distance trade. European powers repeatedly sought to breach the Dey's naval supremacy. From the 17th to 19th centuries, British, Dutch, French, the Spanish fleets took turns bombarding Algiers. The ramparts endured the bombardments, yet remained standing. Local stonemasons reinforced them with heavy cannon barrels during each repair. This resilience earned Algiers the enduring epithet fortress of the Maghreb across North Africa. Even in defeat, it never truly capitulated, persistently countering European powers through diplomacy and rebuilt fortifications. Centuries of conflict catalyzed peculiar social transformations. Numerous European captives, particularly sailors and artisans, settled permanently in Algiers, gradually assimilating into local society. They converted to Islam, intermarried with locals, and ultimately joined the pirate fleets that had once enslaved them. By the late 18th century, some descendants even held positions within the bureaucracy managing ransom payments and trade. This illustrates how this Ottoman protectorate forged by resistance and maritime power evolved into a thriving crossroads where empire, faith, and wealth converged. By 1830, the Ottoman Algerian Governorate had withstood centuries of bombardment and rebellion. Yet internal corruption and weakened authority had eroded its defences. Amid domestic turmoil and official crisis, France discerned an opportunity for overseas expansion. The fuse was lit by a diplomatic spot of verbal altercation between the Algerian governor and the French consul. During a dispute over decades minus old grain supply debts, the governor allegedly struck the consul with a fly whisk. In Paris, this trivial gesture became a political gift. Newspaper sensational, is edited as a national humiliation, and the government seized upon it to divert domestic crises by launching military action. Soon a fleet of warships set sail from Toulon towards the Algerian coast. In June 1830, over 30,000 French troops landed at Sidi Ferrawatch, west of Algiers. The Ottoman garrison faced overwhelming odds with outdated weaponry, relying solely on obsolete artillery and hastily assembled local forces. After 3 weeks of fierce fighting, French artillery reduced the city's defenses to rubble. The governor surrendered after pledging respect for property, religion, and local customs. These assurances were almost immediately discarded. The city was pillaged, mosques turned into barracks, and centuries of Ottoman rule ended within days. France's proclaimed limited punitive action swiftly evolved into plans for permanent occupation. Initially, Paris viewed Algiers as a coastal outpost rather than a significant colony, yet White Roots discovered the fertile soil and development potential of the nearby plains. The front lines pushed inland. Military columns penetrated deep into the hinterland, dismantling local power structures and requisitioning land for European farmers. The French government declared Algeria no longer part of the Ottoman Empire. This land would become France's territorial extension across the Mediterranean. This shift transformed the war from territorial conquest into the subjugation of a nation, sowing the seeds for the most tenacious resistance movement of the 19th century. Among the insurgents was Amir Bidi al-Minascader, a Sufi scholar from western Algeria whose rigorous discipline and profound spirituality earned him the respect of all tribes. After being elected leader in 1832, he forged a network of loyal tribes, establishing an efficient administrative system governed by Islamic law. His capital shifted frequently with military requirements, granting the regime both mobility and adaptability. He minted currency, forged treaties, and trained cavalry riders who could sweep across plains like the wind, vanishing into the mountains in an instant. This organizational framework transformed scattered resistance into coordinated warfare with defined borders, efficient taxation, and clear alliances. French commanders found themselves confronting not merely guerrillas, but an organized ideological movement. Frustrated by Abd al-Minascader's mobility, the French resorted to collective punishment. Entire villages were burned, crops destroyed, and inhabitants deported to coastal camps. In some instances, troops sealed off refuge caves, suffocating those within. Though these tactics cleared vast territories, they failed to break the resistance. Abdul-Qadir persisted in combat through faith and diplomacy until 1847. After his forces were isolated in a final campaign, he laid down arms upon assurances of safe exile. His surrender did not end his influence. During imprisonment and exile, Abdul-Qadir earned international respect for his restraint and moral conduct during the war. Years later, during his 1860 sojourn in Damascus, when Ottoman authorities failed to maintain order, he shielded thousands of Christians from sectarian violence. European newspapers that once branded him a rebel now extolled him as a paragon of courage and humanitarian qualities that forged Algiers' first great struggle against foreign conquest. Following France's conquest of Algeria, the colony status remained unresolved for nearly 2 decades. In 1848, the situation abruptly changed when the French government declared Algeria no longer an occupied territory but an integral part of metropolitan France. The decolonized Algeria was divided into 3 administrative regions: Algiers, Oran, and Constantine, administered as extensions of the homeland. This proclamation implied equality within the French Republic, yet legal reality contradicted this vision. Native Algerians remained subject to the indigenous code, a separate legal framework restricting their movement, property ownership, and political participation. Concurrently, French colonists enjoyed full citizenship rights, creating a dual legal system coexisting under the same flag. Land expropriation underpinned the colonial project. Fertile plains and coastal valleys were stripped from indigenous communities and transferred to European farmers known as colons or P-Noyers. Land once held communally by tribes became private estates, rigorously protected by French law and military force. Millions of Algerians were driven into rocky highlands and arid zones, forced to become tenant farmers or sharecroppers on their former lands. The resulting agricultural economy was designed not to meet local needs, but for overseas export. Grain, olives, and wine flowed northward to supply French markets, while Algerian villages bore the burden of impoverishment and loss. Infrastructure reinforced these connections. Railways, ports and paved roads linked inland and coastal cities, all serving colonial trade. Telegraphs, postal networks, and newly established administrative centres tightly integrated Algeria's economy and bureaucracy with Paris. These changes impressed visiting Europeans as symbols of progress. Yet for most Algerians they signified forced adaptation. Traditional markets declined, caravan routes collapsed, and dependence on imported goods deepened. Though modernizing, the colony remained subject to foreign will, serving for an interest. The urban landscape underwent significant transformation. European colonizers remodeled Algiers, Oran, and Constantine into replicas of southern French towns' wide boulevards, public gardens, and stone government buildings. Yet mere steps from these new districts, the ancient Medina-esque and Casbah quarters remained overcrowded, dilapidated and decaying. Muslim families huddled in crumbling dwellings, while nearby cafes, hotels and theatres catered to the colonial elite. Even religious buildings were repurposed. Mosques became barracks. Churches sprang up in formerly Muslim-only neighbourhoods. Arab schools were supplanted by French secondary institutions. A minority of Algerians sought advancement for education. The colonial system's limited opening of French-language schools fostered a class of translators, clerks, and professionals straddling two worlds. Many admired European learning, yet resented being denied equal rights. This educated cohort later formed the bedrock of reform movements and early nationalist thought. Concurrently, Mediterranean immigration increasingly diversified the colonial population. Spaniards, Italians and Maltese joined French settlers, causing European demographics to surge by the late 19th century. Despite differences, they shared economic privileges unattainable by the Muslim majority, a structure rendering inequality deeply entrenched. Resistance never ceased. The largest uprising of the 19th century, the Mokran Revolt of 1870, when united tens of thousands of Algerians from Kabylie and beyond. French forces suppressed the revolt, executing or exiling its leaders while seizing more land for colonists. This repression signaled the distribution of power, deepening resentment in Algeria's rural regions. By the early 20th century, this colony had become one of the world's principal wine-producing regions. Vast vineyards spread across former pastures and farmland, supplying millions of liters of wine annually to European markets. This constituted a peculiar contradiction, a Muslim-majority nation producing alcoholic beverages for foreign consumption. Beneath this facade of prosperity, the social fractures wrought by law, culture, and opportunity would define the fate of generations of Algerians. After the Second World War, thousands of Algerians returned home in French military uniforms, convinced their service would secure political equality. They had fought on Europe's battlefields, suffered heavy casualties, and deserved recognition. Yet post-war France treated Algeria as private property rather than a partner. Promises of reform dissolved into censorship, economic hardship, and the continuation of nearly a century of colonial laws. A sense of betrayal swiftly spread through towns, villages, and barracks. On 8 May 1945, as Europe celebrated Germany's surrender, tensions abruptly escalated. In Sétif, a peaceful procession carrying French and Algerian flags marched through the streets demanding equality and independence. Police opened fire on the crowd following clashes, plunging Sétif, into chaos. Protests erupted into violent conflict, met with overwhelming force by French troops. The army, colonial militias and fighter planes launched weeks of retaliatory operations. Villages were burned, civilians executed, and thousands perished. The exact death toll remains disputed to this day, yet the trauma is palpable. These massacres shattered the last vestiges of Algerian hope that France would voluntarily alter its colonial rule. In the years that followed, Political activism permeated every stratum of Algerian society. Veterans formed associations to secure their rights. Teachers established study groups to promote Arabic literacy. Migrant workers in France began funding nationalist publications. Reformist parties advocating equality under French law gradually lost influence, replaced by emerging movements demanding complete independence. For the younger generation, the set of events proved peaceful means futile. The path forward lay only in combat, not negotiation. By the late 1940s, the nationalist political camp had fractured into opposing factions. The largest legitimate group, the Movement for Democracy, Freedom and Victory, advocated gaining political representation through elections, believing gradual reform remained feasible, but its radical members disagreed. They formed the clandestine paramilitary organization, the Special Organization, preparing for armed resistance. Recruitment targeted students, workers and veterans familiar with modern warfare. Weapons were concealed in desert farms or smuggled in from Tunisia and Morocco. Regional branches operated independently to evade detection. Urban centers became coordination hubs. Underground networks emerged in Algiers and Oran, distributing leaflets, raising funds, and maintaining clandestine links with activists. Algerians in France also played a crucial role. Factory workers in Marseille and Lyon assisted in printing banned literature and channeled funds and intelligence back to the homeland. Trade unions, student groups and cultural associations transformed exile into political sanctuary. These transnational bonds forged a connection between the Algerian struggle and the rising tide of anti-colonial sentiment in the post-war world. French authorities responded with repression. Censorship intensified. Newspapers banned. Nationalist leaders arrested or exiled. Secret police monitored dissent in mosques, schools and cafes. Yet these measures only strengthened the underground networks. The state's refusal to acknowledge moderate demands spurred factions to collaborate more closely, uniting Islamists, socialists, and nationalists. They shared a common goal: lending French in workshops, farmhouses, and student lodgings. Mimeograph machines quietly churned out new publications. Ink stains and hand-cranked rollers replaced censored printing presses. Smuggled printing plates stowed in suitcases crossed the Mediterranean, fueling the presses. Entire resistance newspapers were grafted in basements and back rooms, passed hand to hand under dim lights. Their pages carried discourses on identity, calls for autonomy, and coded directives conveyed through poetic metaphor. These small circles of printers and distributors laid the foundations for the nationalist underground organization, soon to rise in open revolt. By the early 1950s, Algeria was fractured, not by ideology, but by means. Negotiations with France collapsed. Repression hardened resolve. Secret organizations bore after the set, if massacres prepared for action. The revolutionary countdown had begun. On 1 November 1954, meticulously orchestrated attacks struck police stations, armories and communication lines across Algeria. The operation was executed by an organization calling itself the National Liberation Front (FLN). Its objective was simple yet monumental: to end French rule through a coordinated nationwide uprising. This event, known as the Red All Saints' Day, marked the beginning of an 8-year struggle that would reshape the destinies of both Algeria and France. The FLN dedicated itself to forging a united front, rallying peasants, workers, students, and nationalist groups under a single banner. Its fighters operated in the Vercors Mountains, the southern desert, and the narrow alleyways of coastal cities. Guerrilla warfare became the strategic core, relying on highly mobile light units to execute lightning raids and withdraw swiftly before French forces could respond. France responded with overwhelming force to suppress the uprising in its North African colony, still referred to as a province. Within months, tens of thousands of troops were deployed to the colony. By the late 1950s, the garrison exceeded 400 Zaro troops. The military cannoned established fortified zones, implemented aerial surveillance, and formed specially trained counter-insurgency units. Interrogations, curfews and collective punishment became routine. What began as local uprisings gradually evolved into a modern war of military, political and psychological confrontation. In rural areas, villages suspected of aiding the National Liberation Front faced brutal reprisals. Entire communities were forcibly relocated to controlled zones known as reorganization camps. Over 2 million civilians were displaced during these operations, losing their farmlands and homes. This policy, intended to sever insurgents from their social base, instead intensified rural resentment. As suffering spread, youth from displaced families joined guerrilla units. These rural guerrillas grew stronger after each crackdown. Meanwhile, the conflict spread to cities. The colonial capital Algiers became a focal point of the struggle. The National Liberation Front established an underground network, coordinating bombings, strikes and propaganda campaigns. French paratroopers responded with mass arrests and torture, attempting to dismantle the organization. The 1957 Battle of Algiers brought hostilities to a head. The entire Carthage district was sealed off. Suspected militants were rounded up. Intelligence extracted through brutal methods. Though French forces briefly controlled the city, they lost moral authority. Revelations of torture sparked internal French divisions and international outrage. Despite stringent censorship, reports of wartime atrocity spread through international media. Newly independent Arab and African nations provided political and financial backing to the FLN, while non-aligned states brought the issue before the United Nations. The Algerian conflict gradually became emblematic of mid-20th century global declination movements. Within France, young intellectuals and veterans questioned the government methods and the human cost of sustaining the colonial empire. Within the National Liberation Camp, though factional leaders debated strategy and governance, a shared objective sustained the movement's vitality. By the early 1962, French public opinion had shifted. Economic pressures, political crises, and the collapse of the Fourth Republic signaled the war's unsustainability. Peace talks commenced in Evian, Switzerland. In March 1962, the Evian Accords ended hostilities, recognizing Algeria's independence after 132 years of colonial rule. Post-war chaos ensued. Nearly 1 million European expatriates, the PIDs-Noirs, fled to France, while tens of thousands of Muslim laborers, known as HARC, is also evacuated fearing reprisals. Amidst the mass exodus, Algerian fighters celebrated their triumph. In remote mountain camps near the war's origins, radio operators powered makeshift transmitters with carbatteries to send encrypted dispatches announcing the end of colonial rule. A faint yet steady signal reached Cairo. When Algeria gained independence in 1962, crowds poured into streets to celebrate victory. After nearly a decade of war and generations of struggle, national flags fluttered atop dilapidated buildings as refugees fleeing the conflict began returning home. Yet beneath the public jubilation lay a nation's arduous quest for self-definition. Infrastructure lay in ruins, the economy severely unbalanced, and technical expertise had been massively drained. In the post-ceasefire exodus, over 800 Zoro-European colonists departed, leaving factories idle, farmlands fallow, and government institutions vacant. Though Algeria had gained its freedom, the machinery of a functioning state had to be rebuilt from near-nothingness. The National Liberation Front (FLN), which had led the War of Independence, became the bedrock of political life. After spearheading the military and diplomatic campaign that secured sovereignty, the organization transformed into the ruling party, shouldering the responsibility of constructing state institutions. Divergences soon emerged within the party over the post-colonial form of the nation. Some veteran fighters advocated a centralized system grounded in socialism and state planning, while others favored devolving power to local regions. The army, organizers of the revolution, also sought decision-making involvement. A fragile equilibrium emerged between elected leaders. The military, and regional institutions that had governed liberated zones during the war. Ahmed Ben Bella emerged as a central figure in these early transformations. This charismatic elder statesman of the independence movement returned from exile to widespread acclaim. Appointed Prime Minister in 1960 to unelected President the following year, he embodied the hopes of a new nation. Under his leadership, the government seized the industries and farmlands left behind by Europeans. These assets became state property, managed cooperatively by workers and peasants. The goal extended beyond economic recovery to encompass social reform, sharing wealth and opportunity with the forgotten groups of colonial rule. As the state reopened schools, clinics and ports, urban life gradually resumed. One of the government's foremost priorities was literacy. Decades of colonial policy had left millions of Algerians uneducated, particularly lacking Arabic literacy. The government launched a massive educational campaign, dispatching volunteer teachers to remote villages where classrooms became centers for rebuilding civic identity. Curricula covered language, basic mathematics and national history. Schools emphasized that Algiers' future depended on citizens' ability to autonomously manage affairs and safeguard traditions. The new leaderships simultaneously turned its gaze abroad. Algeria joined the non-aligned movement, aligning with nations emerging from colonial rule rather than Cold War blocked. Diplomats positioned the country as a standard bearer for anti-imperialist solidarity, supporting liberation movements across Asia and Africa. Delegations from Ghana, Cuba, Egypt and Yugoslavia visited Algiers, establishing it as a meeting point for developing nations. The young republics for policy displayed confidence despite domestic institutional fragility. Deep-seated challenges persisted. Rebuilding roads, communication lines and irrigation networks demanded both capital and technical expertise. Inflation intensified. Unemployment remained high, and regional leaders debated who would steer the new nation's course. Amid these hardships, early independent Algeria radiated purpose. Cultural centers and youth groups proliferated across towns and villages, blending civic education with a celebration of revolutionary ideals. Early postage stamps, campus posters, and public murals used simple imagery to explain the symbolism of the crescent on the national flag, warm artists, and the values of solidarity and diligence. In a society reborn from the ashes, these small visual narratives also served as vehicles for civic education, guiding the public towards a shared understanding of the meaning of independence. In June 1965, the fledgling Algerian Republic witnessed its first major post-independence power transition. Defense Minister Houari Numidia, backed by the military, ousted President Ahmed Ben Bella in a bloodless coup. This move was proclaimed a correction, not a revolution. Numidia pledged to end years of political infighting and administrative chaos. Most Algerians silently accepted the change, weary of economic hardship and leadership disputes. Military influence and day governance rapidly consolidated, establishing a new political order centered on discipline, efficiency, and national unity rather than personal charisma. The Numidian constructed a highly centralized system where decisions flowed hierarchical from the presidential palace through state institutions to the ruling party. The military became an invisible, yet constant source of authority, ensuring opposition remained fragmented and weak, though restricting public debate. The regime vigorously pursued long-term economic planning. From the late 1960s, a series of national development plans dominated, each focusing on industrial growth and education. The government viewed modernization as the path to substantive, rather than nominal, independence. Algerian kindness sought to transform the Sahara's abundant resources into a self-sufficient economic foundation. Early progress stemmed from state investment in energy infrastructure. The Numidia and his advisors maintained that control over natural resources constituted the true measure of post-colonial sovereignty. For companies long extracted oil and gas from Algerian territory under agreements signed before independence. In 1971, the government assumed full control of these industries through national escheinian. This decisive move substantially increased state revenues and altered Algeria's standing in global energy markets. European and American firms renegotiated contracts under Algerian terms. This policy demonstrated the newly independent nation's capacity to wield economic power on par with established states. The infusion of oil revenues accelerated major public works. The Annaba steel complex rose from the ground. Emerging industrial towns sprang up across the plains, while universities expanded to train engineers and scientists. Each project conveyed the same message. Modernization would serve national dignity. Construction sites proliferated nationwide. Roads to the Sahara, housing for factory workers, vast irrigation dams to expand farmland. Agricultural reforms complemented these initiatives, distributing land to cooperatives and promoting mechanization. Results varied across regions. Few soil and transport bottlenecks hampered progress in many rural areas. Yet the policy explicitly sought to link economic equality with modernization. Algeria's growing wealth and political self-minus assurance elevated its international standing. The Numidia and Carthage positioned the nation as an active voice within the non-aligned movement, an alliance rejecting alignment with either Cold War superpower. From Belgrade conferences to summits across Africa and Asia, Algerian diplomats vigorously championed solidarity among newly independent nations. The government backed liberation movements in Angola, Mozambique and Palestine, viewing this aid as repayment for support once extended to Algerian revolutionaries. These policies extended Algeria's influence far beyond its borders, making it a transit point for activists and exiles seeking a post-colonial leadership model. Domestic political repression coexisted with these achievements. Independent unions and newspapers faced closure, while political dissent remained under close surveillance. Yet many citizens accepted these constraints in exchange for stability, employment, and national pride. State media repeatedly emphasized themes of unity and progress, portraying national modernization as a collective achievement rather than a partisan agenda. The results were visible even from the skies. The newly expanded Hassi Massoud oil fields illuminated the desert at night, their flares and pipelines tracing bright lines across the sandy expanse, a sovereign declaration of Algeria's control over its resources. When Numidia and Carthage died in 1978, Algeria descended into a silent turmoil. His long rule had maintained stability through centralization, yet stifled public participation. The military and ruling party instead elevated Chadli Benji, a cautious, low-key career officer. The nation Benji inherited appeared disciplined on the surface, yet simmered beneath. His administration inaugurated a new chapter centered on controlled reform, seeking to ease political tensions while preserving the regime's core institutions. Early in his tenure, Benji set about diminishing the dominant role of the state-planned economy established under the Numidia and Carthage. The process of economic liberalization unfolded gradually. The government encouraged small private enterprises and eased foreign investment restrictions, seeking to revitalize stagnant industry. Though heavy industry had expanded under the Numidia and Carthage, most enterprises operated inefficiently, yielding low returns, unlimited employment. The government shifted focus towards consumer goods and agriculture to meet growing public needs. Newly enacted investment laws permitted joint ventures with foreign partners, marking the first substantive test of a mixed economy model since independence. Policy reforms collided with turbulent global oil markets. Persistent oil price declines throughout the 1980s devastated Algeria's finances, making petroleum and natural gas the cornerstone of state revenue. Public expenditure contracted, forcing the scaling back of once generous social welfare programs. Unemployment soared, particularly among youth flocking to cities in search of work. Concurrently, population growth far outpaced housing and infrastructure development. Inflation eroded wages, while basic supplies dwindled across multiple provinces. For an entire generation born after independence, economic decline felt like the shattering of promises of progress. Discontent initially manifested in small minor-scale strikes and student protests. By the mid-decade, social tensions had become widespread. Many Algerians complained that the sole legal party, the National Liberation Front, had become detached from people's lives. Inefficient local bureaucracies and the privileges enjoyed by senior officials fueled public anger. The rift between restless urban youth and the rigid political system widened, rendering any administrative reform incapable of withstanding the pressure. In October 1988, minor tensions erupted over food price protests, rapidly escalating into nation-wide demonstrations demanding political change. The scale of the unrest caught the leadership unprepared. As crowds flooded the streets of major cities like Algiers, the army intervened to suppress the protests. Soldiers opened fire on unarmed demonstrators, resulting in hundreds of deaths. The violent crackdown shocked both citizens and officials, exposing the fragility of a system long portrayed as stable. For the first time since independence, the state's authority appeared shaken. The surprising compelled BNJ did to attempt a major power restructuring. A new constitution enacted in 1989 legalized multi-party politics, expanded press freedoms, and weakened the monopolistic position of the National Liberation Front (FLN). Newspapers independent of the government began circulating, publishing previously banned critiques of policy. Political groups rapidly spread nationwide, reflecting regional ideologies and religious perspectives. Among them, the Islamic Salvation Front (IS) grew rapidly, gaining support from communities disillusioned by years of economic reforms that benefited few while plunging most into hardship. Cultural life evolved in tandem with political transformation. During the 1980s, satellite dishes, cassette tapes and imported television programs flooded into Algeria, connecting ordinary citizens to the wider world. Households in Algiers, Oran and Constantine began watching global sporting events, films and novel music programs. These influences shaped turban youth culture, giving rise to styles and attitudes that blended foreign trends with local characteristics. The cautious reforms of the BNJ era ultimately gave rise to a plurality of voices that would soon challenge the nation's political future. In 1991, Algeria prepared for its first multi-party elections, which appeared poised to usher in a new democratic chapter after decades of single-party rule. Dozens of political groups contested seats, but attention soon focused on the Islamic Salvation Front (IS), an organization blending social programs, religious themes and open criticism of government corruption. The results of the first round of voting that December clearly demonstrated its popular base. The party won in most major cities and appeared poised to secure a majority in the second round. For many Algerians, the vote reflected years of discontent, economic decline and political marginalization. For the military and entrenched interests, it signaled a potential shift in state power. Before the second round could take place, senior military figures intervened. In January 1992, the elections were annulled. President BNJ was forced to resign, and the High Council of the nation seized control. The election element triggered mass protests and strikes, rapidly escalating into a state of confrontation. Thousands of members of the Islamic Salvation Front were arrested or deported to desert camps. The party was declared illegal, forcing its supporters underground. Within months, some opposition factions turned to armed struggle. Algeria plunged into a civil war whose intensity and duration exceeded expectations. Armed groups began organizing in remote mountainous regions, particularly in the eastern center. These organizations initially claimed to defend democracy, but soon fragmented into factions with divergent objectives. The largest, the Armed Islamic Group GIA, targeted not only state forces but also designated all collaborators as legitimate targets. Government forces countered with large scale military operations, raids and arrests. By the mid-1990s, both sides resorted to extreme violence. Villages were raided at night, entire families massacred, civilians abducted and vanished without trace. Fear permeated daily life in both towns and villages. Curfews restricted movement in cities. Checkpoints severed communities. Frequent bombings and assassinations forced countless families into displacement. The war's impact extended far beyond the battlefield. Journalists, artists and intellectuals faced persistent threats, rendering cultural expression perilous. Newspapers struggled to survive amid censorship and reprisals. Writers and teachers advocating secular ideas became targets, while others faced abductions for rants, a more ideological retaliation. Broadcasts call for unity. Even entertainment programs reveal fissures of collective trauma. Schools shorten hours for safety. Universities see dwindling enrollment as violence reaches city centers. Islamist factions fight for leadership and ideology, deepening divisions. Some oppose attacks on civilians. Others embraced terrorism's doctrine. The government established local defense units, arming villagers familiar with the terrain. In some areas, these militias provided protection. In others, they intensified the conflict. Ordinary Algerians found themselves caught between two armies, each claiming allegiance to nation or creed. By the late 1990s, exhaustion began to set in. Death tolls were estimated in the tens of thousands, though precise figures remain elusive. To end the bloodshed, newly elected President Abdelaziz Bouteflika implemented reconciliation measures from 1999 onwards. The policy promised amnesty to armed fighters who laid down their weapons and reintegrated into society. Violence gradually subsided, roads reopened, and displaced families began returning home. After a decade of warm inestable and devastation, Algeria finally emerged from the shadows intact. During those years, communication itself became a weapon of conflict. In an era lacking reliable newspapers and free broadcasting, cassette tapes circulated among the populace. Sermons, speeches, and coded messages spread through markets and taxis, carrying propaganda, while simultaneously calling for peace. These plastic tapes supplanted newspapers as the primary channel of persuasion, transforming sound into an independent battlefield. Early 2019 witnessed Algeria's most unexpected and transformative moment in modern history. Abdelaziz Bouteflika, who had governed since 1999, announced his bid for a fifth presidential term. By then, he had scarcely appeared in public for years. His health had markedly deteriorated following a stroke in 2013. For many Algerians, his candidacy signified not merely the perpetuation of power, but the stagnation of the entire political system. Institutional gridlock, alongside rampant unemployment and corruption, had steadily eroded public trust. The broadcast of his candidacy declaration ignited simmering discontent that had quietly built since the Civil War decade prior. Within weeks, citizens organized through social media and local networks rather than political parties. Though initially small, the protests rapidly escalated into nation-wide demonstrations. In the streets of Algiers, Oran, Constantine, and even small towns rarely witnessing protest, young people, veterans, and families gathered together. This wave became known as the Iraq movement, meaning the movement. It emerged spontaneously, operated autonomously, and maintained a remarkable level of peacefulness. Protesters gathered each Friday, transforming the rest day into a ritual of civic expression. The core slogan, "They must all go yet no horge," I echoed through boulevards and squares. This rallying cry encapsulated a shared demand, not merely to oust a single leader, but to uproot the entire elite class, a group inextricably linked to decades of collusion and stagnation. The uniqueness of Iraq lies not only in its scale, but in its restraint. The marchers consistently avoid violence. Even under pressure from security forces, protesters bring their children, carry banners, and voluntarily clean the streets after each demonstration. Unprecedented unity transcends language and region. Berber communities from Kab Ili marched shoulder with Arabic speaking groups from the south, forming a national front that emphasizes inclusion over division. The protest atmosphere was solemn yet not devoid of humor. Painted banners displayed sharp-written wordplay in Arabic, Amazigh, and French. Some mocked official slogans. Others questioned the system's logic, promising reform yet repeating the cycle of control. By March and April, the wave of resistance became unstoppable. University students staged collective walkouts. Lawyers organized silent marches, and national trade unions began supporting protesters. Under immense pressure, Bouteflika resigned in April 2019, ending 2 decades in power. His departure marked a historic moment achieved without armed conflict or societal collapse. Yet deeper questions remained: how could Algeria transition to a genuinely accountable government? The transitional authorities announced new elections and pledged gradual reforms, yet many citizens refused to participate, arguing genuine change required dismantling old power networks. Protests continued to ferment, shifting focus from top-down a single leader to reconstructing the entire political order. Even as activists faced arrest and gatherings were restricted, the ideals of the Shirak movement persisted in discussions across cafes, universities, and online forums. Digital platforms became the nerve center of this new civic life. Live streams captured the scale of marches in real time. Independent journalists bypass official media to disseminate updates, while satirical memes mocking the political ecosystem transcend age and class divides. Following the 2020 pandemic outbreak, protest rhythms slowed, yet the collective consciousness of awakening persisted. Despite economic hardship, declining oil revenues, and political fatigue, the movement's legacy endures. It carved out a space for public accountability unseen in decades, reigniting the spirit of open debate on Algeria's developmental trajectory. The protest's creativity spawned distinctive cultural expressions: murals, poetry, and slogans, transforming entire streets into vibrant civic art galleries. These messages, often penned in 3 languages, convey both apprehension and pride, laced with humor, capturing the rejuvenated vigor of a society confronting its history and defining its future. Thus this chapter of history gradually fades into the tranquil river of time. Certain mysteries remain unsolved. Certain truths continue to shape our world. Together we traverse the past, gleaning its lessons. If you weave this understanding into daily life, history's echoes shall never fade. Thank you for listening. Until we meet again, may the past endure in your heart.